conflict right now. And everything's polarized. Our politics is probably the biggest thing right now. But I think it's really important when we have a strong opinion to address an individual or a group, not feeling like there's a win-lose situation. We need to help resolve conflict. We need to go into it in a win-win mentality. Like, I respect your opinion, now please respect mine. So not go at it in attack mode, but go at it in, like Karen was saying, with respect for one another, and everybody's opinion is valuable. And we're not going to agree. We're not going to agree. So, I don't know, having been in this church a really long time, that really has been the cornerstone for me. People respect one another. Wherever you are in your faith journey is respected, and wherever you are in your personal journey, and your opinions are respected. So we need to respect one another by going into these situations, not in attack mode, but in a feeling of win-win. And I think that will help to heal us if we have that attitude.
And let me just say one last thing, that we also felt as a group that this church, this family needs to be our safe place. All of that going on out there, this is the place where we should be able to come, express ourselves. Know it's okay, even if you don't agree with me and I, that it's okay.
Thank you, Yellows. Isn't there a song that they call them Mellow Yellows? Or... Anyway. Yeah, so this idea of like, yeah, they were very accommodating. So even in how they begin to interact showed up in the group. Blues.
Before I introduce our speaker, Sheila, she asked me to go first because we sat around in a circle, everybody looked in each other's eyes, and no one said anything. And then someone said, maybe it should be somebody who has green on their head. Then I heard my name whispered or something. And so I spoke first. I said, let's start with the excesses. So we will get in trouble for analysis by paralysis by analysis, and indecisiveness. And sure enough, we quickly went there. I always thought in my mind that we had assembled with a little bit of an assignment to come back in half an hour with something. But first, I opened up the floor, as it were, to create a hopper of ideas for brainstorming. What our strengths and excesses are, what kind of people we are, how we act. And that took about 40 minutes, just to begin, and at least have everybody say something. And then I tried to bring it back. I started moving into my green area, because we did have a conflict, we noticed right from the beginning, because you can be paralyzed by analysis, or in excess, number 4 says you can be preoccupied with timelines. So we have a conflict in our personality, and here I am. So I wanted to go on break. I wanted to make the next section as short as possible, And I said, okay, what will we deliver? A skip? Nelson, you got any ideas? He didn't. A written list? Well, okay, we can write on the flip chart, that'd be nice, and let you read it. That'd be a visual one. Or let's do an audio one. We will speak to you and tell you our list.
So I made a list of things that people said. And I also want to point out that there's a list in the book. It goes like 1 through 7. So Fred followed this list very methodically as we talked through the list. I'm just want to read and add a little bit. Some of these things are problems that we recognize in ourselves. One is we set false deadlines for ourselves because we are driven by timelines that we create. We try to meet a deadline and we put in extra effort to do that and exhaust ourselves. And one of the things that causes us an incredible amount of stress is closing off options. Okay, so if there's a whole bunch of ideas that are out there and we haven't explored each one, and somebody makes a decision, someone that's probably red or something, then that is very stressful to us because we haven't explored all of them yet. And the internet is just a place of terror for us because there's just so much information that's out there. And so it makes it difficult actually to volunteer for things or take on a challenge because we know there's just too much out there. Okay. And we are list makers. We need to have lists for our daily lives so that we can prioritize what's important and what's not. And we tried to come up with some ideas about this preserving aspect that it says that we have. And there were some ideas, but most of the group said, I don't understand that. And another problem that we have, I didn't see on the list, but we all kind of agreed on this, is that when we have interactions with people and there's something to be discussed, we look at everyone and everything as a problem to be solved. Someone brought up the question, so the different personality types that are out there, the blue and the yellow and the red and the green, do we have, as blues, a specific personality type that we all have problems with? And there was this chorus of, yellow! Because blues want to be precise, and yellows are like, whatever. We tried to come up with some conclusions, okay? We did try, okay? I want to point that out, okay? And one idea was, well, let's just say these are the goals that we have, okay? So then we kind of got stuck in, yeah, well, we're kind of overanalyzing what our goals are supposed to be. And then there's another conclusion that we came to, which is really, really helpful, okay? So we should spend our time doing the most important things that are on our list, but not necessarily the most urgent, okay? Because that's just you know, if you're doing something that's the most urgent, that means that you wasted time doing something else. But anyway, and then, you know, there was a little bit of pushback on trying to come up with some ideas about time setting, and trying to keep things in order, because, you know, there's always a new, most urgent thing that comes up and it needs to get put on your list, and you don't know what to do with it. And so we just, I think Fred was going to talk about paralysis a little bit, but we just, if we have too many things that are on our list, we just kind of stop functioning a little bit. So people have been coming up to me during the break, keep adding things to my list. And so the conclusion that I was asked to make by the most recent person was, we didn't really decide on anything.
So there you have a report. And your assignment for the blues during lunch is to quantify all that data and then, yeah, list it in order. No, it's not listening. Who do we have left? Greens. How are the Greens reporting? We got a whole list of people. Oh, here we go.
So our group started out, we sat down, we didn't get to know each other. We started out right away. What are our strengths? Do we all feel that our strengths? Absolutely, that makes sense. What are our weaknesses? Yeah, we spent about 30 seconds because we don't really have any weaknesses, I don't think. And then from there, we just kind of, all right, what are we supposed to do and what do we need to do? And we need to come up with a mission statement. How are we going to resolve this conflict of the church? How are we going to move forward? We're not going to talk about feelings. We're not going to, let's get right to the issue. Let's go, let's move forward and get things solved, right?
So after we did that, we had about 5 minutes left. And I've got a little bit of a blue in me, in addition to the green. So I started focusing on, you know, we have to deliver back a product, right? So despite all the type A's in the group, and they're all standing around here, right? Nobody seemed to want to come up here and speak, so they all pointed the finger at me. So what we decided to do was we literally had no time left. Is that we were going to read off some of the qualities of the strengths. So I'll start with the first one.
Wait, how are you going to do it? It's on here on page 23. We can just move on.
But in all seriousness, it was a little bit like trying to herd cats at the end, and trying to go everybody together. And I think we did exemplify a lot of both the strengths and the excesses of it. So we really did. I think we were all a little bit bored by that time, right? We just wanted to get going and solve the problems. We also had we were unrealistic about limitations, right? We weren't even thinking about the time frame until the very end, right? So then we just kind of pointed, I kind of pointed at Josh and said, why don't you just make that opening statement? And then we'll just go up there and we'll read off these lists, because that's all, you know, it's all right here, right? And then this John Doris, right? She said, well, yeah, then I'll kind of shoot at you for just reading off the list, because it's only just reading off a list, right? And we should be doing more than that. So I think that we did have lots of ideas. We took on the challenge. We did all the things that are in the strengths, but we exhibited all those excesses. And I think that's the message that that this group have to think about in terms of moving forward the church, right? This weekend and last weekend is not all about solving the problems, but developing the right mindset, the right climate of opinion, and the right of building this thing to move forward in a way that probably the other groups kind of intuitively understand a little bit better than we do, right? We're looking at solving things rather than maybe just taking a little bit more time, doing a little bit more analysis, and then also probably thinking a little bit more about the EQ over the IQ, right? We tend to think, high energy, high IQ people, but we need to think about that EQ as well. Anybody else in the group want to add anything? Come on up, Robert, come on.
Come on. Like Karen said when she Like Karen said when she spoke, everybody in the church should be heard. This is a huge church, and there's room for more people. But everybody that's here, not only should they be heard, they should be able to hear the word of God in any way they want, and there should be room for everybody in this church to get whatever it is that they need to get fulfilled.
Anybody else in the group? Come on, you have a lot. Come on, you have a lot to say when we were in the library.
I'm gonna volunteer Roger to talk about blind spots.
Right.
So as we discussed this, we found a common element to all four groups. Each group knows their strengths and their weaknesses. Each group doesn't know or appreciate their blind spots. And part of the challenge is that we have to be able to appreciate the blind spots of the other three groups. And if we don't do that, or can't do that, or refuse to do that, then we haven't really progressed very far. So blind spots is what came out of this for me was really the important thing. You know where they are and you know where to look for them, everything's going to begin to work out. If you want to be oblivious to them, then we're going to keep leading and maybe people will follow. Now, you may ask, why don't everybody stand up around the outside? If you notice that, you thought that would be symbolic that we're taking a lead and we're trying to hurt you guys go in the direction we think we need to go. And it's illustrative of the blind spot because each of the other groups may say, well, you might want to go there, but we kind of want to go there. Or we need to analyze it. And if we don't accommodate that and get everybody kind of on the same page, resolving any type of conflict is going to be a real challenge. Which?
The green blind spot.
The green, our green blind spot is blue, yellow, and red. No, I mean, if you look at our strengths and our weaknesses, there's some blind spots there, but the real thing is we don't really connect with how the other three groups are operating. We just don't see it, and that's what we have to spend some time trying to focus on. That's all red. All right.
That is a perfect lead-in to our next section here. You might wonder why I have this table up here. What a lot of people don't know about me is that I'm a cabinet maker by trade, and my red comes out in the way I go about building furniture. The lady actually sent me this picture Thursday and says, "Can you build this table?" And I said, "I can, but there's a lot of joinery in there. It looks pretty simple, but there's a lot of mortise and tenons, and angled mortise and tenons, and it's going to take a long time putting that together." A green cabinet maker might say, "Oh yeah, I can screw that together and get it to you." But to me, like, there's integrity that I need to put something together in integrity. Like, you could screw that together and imply that it's well-built, but it's not. So I'm gonna make sure that those mortise and tenons are in there and that table's not gonna fall apart down the road. So while you were in your groups, I was just processing this, like, how does this play out in kind of my own life? Like, and not just in relationships, but how I go about my work. And to me, like, if I build something, it has to have integrity. And that's that red coming out. Like, I can't just pass it on to the next person and then, well, in 5 years from now, when it falls apart, that's your problem. Like, I can't do that. And there's other motivations for that, but a lot of it is that you get what you see. So hang on to these things, and as we talk throughout the day, kind of this idea, I really like this idea that we kind of understand our own strengths and weaknesses, but maybe we don't understand others as well. Like, and then we all have our own blind spots. So I'm gonna switch over to my PowerPoint here. Okay, there's where we want to be. So this next section, we're going to begin talking about some interpersonal peacemaking skills. And I'm sure that you have all done these kind of things, like, you practice like paraphrasing and all those kinds of things. We'll talk about those things, but we want to take a little bit different angle on some of these things. So we want to talk about language. And listening to begin with. And by the way, we're really going to try to stick to our schedule, which we're going to pause at noon for lunch, and then we'll just pick up wherever we are and go on from there, because I really want to try to stay on schedule for those that are putting all the effort into the food back there, and respect that. I don't know, that's probably my red coming out of me. And then we're going to talk about collaborative skills. How do we talk about these things together? How do we talk about our differences together? And that's really kind of what this next section is about. How do we develop these skills of listening to each other? So I'd like to begin by talking about language and speaking as a metaphor. So we talked a bit about this last night. So we use metaphors all the time to describe things, right? So we talk about the roof of our mouth. Like, well, it's not really a roof, but it's like the top of our mouth. Like, the roof of our mouth is a metaphor to describe the top of our mouth. Or the tongue of a shoe, it's a metaphor. It's not an actual tongue. Or you drive me crazy. Like, if you tell someone that doesn't understand English, like, let's say, like, what do you mean, like, you drive me crazy? Like, driving has to do with cars. Like, why would I drive you crazy in my car? So, or the solution to a problem. Like, solution can have different meanings, right? Like, it can be the solution to a math problem, but if you're a chemist, a solution is, something that you mix together to, create something. And so if I say, this is the solution to my problem, what am I saying by that? So you kind of have to understand, even how the metaphor is being used. Like, am I saying that, well, if I put these two things together, I'll come up with a good, solution? Or is it saying if I do X, Y, and Z, I'll end up with, A or whatever? what do I mean by a solution? So it's a metaphor that we use to try to talk about a problem. And words themselves are metaphors. They're a way that we use to communicate. So when I say the word tree, it's not a tree, like the word tree, that's the sound tree is not a tree, but it's something that represents what I'm talking about to you. It's a metaphor. And it's not set in stone, right? If I use Pennsylvania Dutch and I say bomb, it's still a tree, but it's a different sound. But if I'm representing that object outside the window there by a sound, it's a metaphor. So a metaphor, the dictionary defines metaphor as something used or regarded as being used to represent something else. So the sound tree is representative of that living object out there. Blackoff and Johnson, who wrote a very interesting, and some of you may be familiar with this article, they wrote an article back in the early 80s called Metaphors to Live By, and they define metaphors as understanding one kind of thing in terms of another. And I really like that definition, like understanding, whatever we're talking about in terms of another thing. It gives us a sense of what we can all agree that this is what we're talking about. We have a common understanding of that. In their article, they say that metaphors shape the way that we understand the world. Words and metaphors shape the way that we understand the world. And so they say when we talk about, and they use this in their article, I'm not just extrapolating this from it and using it for my own sake. They actually use this example in their article, so that when we talk about conflict, we talk about it in terms of war. So, for example, your claims are indefensible. Like that's a military term, right? Or she shot down all my arguments. It's a military term. Or the criticisms were right on target. Somebody mentioned this last night, that conflict is like a tug of war. There's that metaphor. This is how we kind of in Western culture, or at least in the United States, talk about conflict. Like we use military terms, and so it shapes the way that we even think about conflict. Like it's this war, like it's me against you, and who's going to win? Like somebody, here's another one. I demolished his argument. Like, we love to do that, right? Like, I just demolished his argument. Like, he had, no defenses against it. But what we're really trying, like there's someone wins and someone loses in a conflict. That's kind of how we approach it. I'm right, that means you have to be wrong. And the object is for you to understand that I'm right. So there's a winning and a losing. They suggest, what would happen if we would change the way that we talk about conflict? And what would happen if we would talk of conflict or argument as a dance? How would that change the way that we view conflict? In other words, and you're probably, if you know anything about Amish and Mennonites, we don't dance, and so my vocabulary is really weak in this. But as participants in the dance, you're performers. You're not combatants, you're performers. And you perform in aesthetically pleasing ways, like you respond to each other's moves, like you move and I respond to that. So it's a back and forth, it's this kind of reciprocating back and forth. But the goal isn't to someone wins or someone loses. Like we're in this dance together and we're going through life together. And I love your story about, your wife brings the excitement, but you bring the order to that. And so there's this back and forth, right? And you've made it 67 years. And she adds something to your life that you don't have, and you add something to her life that you don't have, and there's this dance. It doesn't have to be a battle. It can be a dance. And so, just the language that we use to talk about conflict can really change the way that we understand what we're involved in. It doesn't have to be, there's nothing that says that it has to be a battle. But because of that's the language that we use to describe it, we have kind of been sucked into that. And what would happen if we begin to change it? So I'm gonna read another section from this poem, and I think this is, I've read this I don't know how many times, and every time it's almost like, you know, when you read scripture and you read something over and over again, is it, oh, I never caught that before. And this is what this section of this poem, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, has done for me. And it's called Reduce Defensiveness and Break the Defensiveness Chain. I could hear the light beams as they entered every cell. Every cell is a house of the God of light. Actually, I have this on the screen here so you can follow along. Every cell is a house of the God of light, they said. I can hear the spirits who love us stomp dancing. They were dancing as if they were here, and then another level of here, and then another level, until the whole earth and sky was dancing. Yeah. I'm just going to read it. Somehow I missed it here. I was working on it last night. Until the whole earth and sky was dancing. We are here dancing, they said. There was no there. There was no I or you. There was us. There was we. There we were, as if we were the music. You cannot legislate music to lockstep, nor can you legislate the spirit of music to stop at political boundaries, or poetry, or art, or anything that is of value or matters in this world and the next worlds. This is about getting to know each other. We will wind up back at the blues, standing on the edge of the flatted fifth, about to jump into a fierce understanding together. I really think what she's getting at is like, you know, we don't have to go at this head to head. We can be engaged with each other. And I love that last phrase, getting to a fierce understanding of each other. This idea of like, what are our blind spots? How do we understand my blind spots? And I need you to help me see that. I can't, if it's a blind spot, I can't see it. So I need, you know, blues to help me see that. I need yellows to help me see that blind spot. And that's a dance. That's different than just butting heads over green beans, right? Should we throw the green beans away or should we keep the green beans? This is, what's my blind spot in this? What don't I see? And I need your help in seeing that. So how do you get there? That's a big question, right? Like how do you go about that? Helping each other see those blind spots. So we want to take a little bit of time to just talk about that. So often we kind of focus on, you know, positions. You know, should we put a screen in the sanctuary or should we not put a screen in the sanctuary? We can get bogged down in that. We're just butting heads, like, you know, trying to convince the other person of my view. And why am I so tied up in that? What's behind all of that? What are our common interests? And so instead of focusing on those positions, how do we get to understanding each other's interests? What's below that? And so, we say, like, help me understand why the green beans are so important to you. I didn't realize that. Can you help me understand that? Say more about how that made you feel. Can you help me understand that? Like, trying to really understand the other person rather than just say, well, that's stupid, they're just green beans. Like, we can go to the store and get more if you want more, right? That's all that matters, is that we have green beans. I don't care how you got them. Like, we had green beans for supper. There were leftovers, we'll get more tomorrow. But there's something below that, right? That the wife was, like, it meant something more to her than just green beans. It was all the work that went into making that for her family that night. So when we talk about how do we get to interest? Well, often, like, we think about this in terms of, like, how do we position ourselves when we're talking about something? And we like to think of, like, so if Tom and I have something that we're discussing or have differences of, rather than sitting at opposite sides of the table and really banging heads, we like to think that, well, we're sitting on both on the same side of the table, and there's a problem that we're both trying to get at. And we're working at this together. It's not me against Tom, it's Tom and I working at this problem together. How do we get at that? Like, what are you interested in, Tom? Like, why is this important to you? This is what I think about that, and trying to really listen to each other. And we'll get more in depth in that. So we often use this chart. It's not original to us, but often we just focus on the positions. It can be anything. It can be, screens in the sanctuary. It can be green beans. It can be whatever. But how do you get down to that mutual interest, where there's overlapping interests, that everybody's concerns are taken into consideration? So I like to use this example. Our daughter worked for Brethren Disaster Services in Puerto Rico for about 3 years after Hurricane Maria, helping rebuild a lot of homes on the island. And she lived there for about 3 years, and she thought she was going to stay there. But then last summer she decided she was going to move back home. And my mother had been living beside us. My mother passed away about 2 years ago. Before that, we helped her get settled in a long-term nursing facility. And so we had this home sitting beside us that was empty. And she was home visiting, and we were thinking about selling it. And she said, well, could I live there? And I said, well, yeah, that's a possibility. And so she decided she's going to move home. This is this very independent girl that, like, I remember her sitting, I'd sit at the head of the table, and she would sit right here at supper time, and she would say, Dad, can I do this? And I would say, no, I don't think so. But Dad, it would just go on and on and on until it was finally just much easier to give in to her than to continue arguing. She was just the most stubborn and independent girl you could ever see. But I told my wife, like, we can't squelch that because she's going to put it to good use. And so, of all the children I ever imagined moving home, it wasn't her. And she, while she was in Puerto Rico, she got a dog. And my wife hates dogs. And so she wanted to know, can I keep the dog in the house? And my wife was, what are we gonna do? I just don't think I can handle that. And it was gonna be devastating to my daughter if she can't keep the dog in the house. I mean, it was like, her partner almost, like she loved the dog. She got it as a little puppy, grew up with it. And so finally I asked her, like, why don't you want the dog in the house? She says, I'm afraid that when she moves away, the house is gonna be ruined, it's gonna be dirty, it's gonna be smelly, and then the house is ruined. Well, so that's the interest. It wasn't the dog, right? That wasn't the issue. The issue was, is the house gonna be left the way that it was when she moved in? And so now you have something to work with, right? It's not like, do you allow the dog, do you not allow the dog? Like, that's the presenting issue, right? What was at the common interest, or what was at the interest for my wife was that the house doesn't get ruined. Well, my daughter is very cleanly, so of course that was an issue with her. Like, when she understood, like, okay, you can have the dog, but, if he chews up things, and he has, you're responsible for fixing it. Like, that's part of the responsibility. And if the carpets need shampooing, you're responsible to have them shampooed. Well, of course she agreed to that. And so they were able to find a common ground rather than just, her being really hurt by us not allowing her to have a dog. We were able to, by, drilling down a little bit, finding, what was really at the bottom of my wife's interest. So those are the kind of, like, how do you, like, this is a common problem. We're both working at it together. It's not just us butting heads about something. So how do we listen to each other? So this is a really important chart. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. This is called the Johari window, and it gets to what the Greens were, or who was talking about? It was Roger was talking about the blind spots. So this is a chart that kind of gets at that a little bit. So all of us have open areas in our life. So this is a quadrant, and that quadrant shifts. And this was put together by a couple of, I believe they were psychiatrists. The name Johari is a conflation of their two names back in the 50s after the war. And they came up with this way of kind of thinking about how do we kind of develop self-awareness of ourselves. But I also like to think about, like, how do we talk to each other? How do we get to know each other? Some people use this kind of as an analytical tool. I don't see much value in that. But I think it's a great illustration of how of the blind spots that we have. So all of us have this open area. So it's obvious that I'm white, I'm in my late 50s, that may or may not be obvious. I'm losing my hair. I'm a little overweight. Those things, like, all of us know, right? That's the open area. But then there are things in the hidden area. There are things that I know about myself that you don't know about me. So I just revealed a little bit ago that that I'm a cabinet maker by trade. So you know a little bit more about me. You know that I come from Amish background. But there are other things that you don't know about me that are hidden. Like, I haven't told you that up until the beginning of the year, I pastored a small rural Mennonite Church of the Brethren congregation in Southwest Michigan. You didn't know that about me. Now you do. That's out in the open area. There's a lot more hidden that you don't know about me. There are things in this this unknown area, down in this quadrant, in the blind spots that I don't know about me, that you do. You might know some things about me that I don't know. You might say, well, he thinks he's a really good speaker, but he's not. When's this going to be over? Like, and you don't tell that to me, but you know that I don't know that. Or, I have mustard on my face from my sandwich, this morning or whatever. And I'm oblivious to it, but you all know it. And you say, like, I wish you would take care of that. Those kind of things that you can see about me that I don't necessarily know. And then there are things that neither you nor I know about myself. And we were talking about this at break, like sometimes why do I react in certain ways in certain situations? And we were talking about, what is it, Brian? Brian and I were talking about it at break that, he says, I wish I had the kind of the ability to reflect and think of, like, why did I get so upset at the green beans? Like, I don't know why I got so upset at that. But all of us have things in our past that that we're not really aware of, and you don't know, and I don't know why I react to certain things in certain ways. I like to use this illustration. One of my colleagues at MSU, Michigan State, she works with former residential school students that in Canada. She's indigenous herself, and she works with former students that were in residential school. And I'm sure you're all aware of that whole story. But she works specifically the way that food affects people that have been students in residential schools. Because often children were forced to eat foods that they don't like or weren't accustomed to. And it's a traumatic experience. Like, I can tell you another story about myself that if we have time to get to it, but children are forced to eat, liver because it's cheap, right? And how many kids love liver? But they're forced to eat it. And so there's certain things, even when you smell it, like you get a gag response. Like if you're a woman, and some, my wife has this reaction to certain foods that she had reactions to when she was pregnant, and when she smells them, even smells them now, like she gags. So there, and understanding that there are these things, we have these reactions to certain situations that our body just has developed this response over time, and we don't know why, but I know that and we just tell people, well, just get over it. But that's not very helpful because we embody those responses. Like literally, like it changes our DNA so that we respond to certain situations in particular ways. And we don't know why. You don't know why, I don't know why. But, I always respond, maybe even to, I was telling Brian that my brother, my older brother above me was a strong green, and I had this kind of love-hate relationship with him, and whenever I encounter someone that's similar to him, I had this kind of visceral reaction to it, like, and I had to think, I'm reacting the way that I would have reacted to my brother. And yet I kind of attach myself to that person at the same time. And kind of understanding like why we do those things, they're not always known. So how do we get to those things? How do we, that dotted line represents like the broader we can open those windows, the more understanding we can have of each other and decrease those blind spots so that, I can understand why Roger might react in this particular way, in this situation, because, Roger has this in his background, and, this is just kind of his response. That doesn't justify it necessarily. Like sometimes it can also help us to then kind of get a grip on it, and if we talk about that often, like the storytelling that we talk about, like telling our stories is a kind of a therapeutic way for us to not react the way that we've always reacted to a particular situation. So kind of trying to narrow or decrease that blind spot, or that hidden area, not the blind spot, but the blind spot too, but that hidden area, so that we can kind of understand why other people might react, or why I react in certain ways. So this is where the whole dance analogy comes in. It's like, I need you. I need blues. I need greens. I need yellows. I need other reds to really kind of help close that blind spot. Help me understand that. And that only comes through conversation, through storytelling. So we have 6 minutes left before lunch, and we're gonna stop on time. We have more that we want to talk about, but I just want to kind of get into this. So we often talk about interpersonal peacemaking skills in 3 different ways. One is like planning, like how do we set a time up that we can talk about this. So when my kids were small, and by the way, here's another thing that you don't know about me. This is maybe an influence of my Amish background. My wife and I have 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls. But we were big baseball and softball fans, and I coached Little League. And our kids played softball and baseball through high school, and it was, at the beginning of the season, the coach would always say, we'd have the kind of the team parent meeting at the beginning of the season, and the coach would say, now, I'm not a professional coach. I'm going to make mistakes, and I know that. But don't come to me right after the game and spout off to me. Give it 24 hours, think about it a little bit, and then I'll be happy to talk about it. Couple things: the coach is in no frame of mind to talk about it then, and you're not in any frame of mind to talk about it in the heat of the moment. And often, like 24 hours, it lets you, maybe I can understand why he or she chose to put this player in, or to do this or do that. It gives you a little bit of time to cool off. So this idea of like planning, can we talk about this? When would you have time to talk about this? Instead of cornering somebody and say, you really upset me when you said this, or I disagree with you on this or that. Like, so is there time? I have a concern. Can we talk about this together? When's a good time for you? So just taking the time to plan rather than just laying into someone. The other thing is the ability to bracket. In other words, kind of stepping back from things and trying to understand, kind of setting your own interests aside for the moment and trying to listen to the other person. We call that bracketing. Setting our own interests aside for a little bit. That doesn't mean that you don't get a chance to speak, but when you do speak, that you speak for yourself. You're not saying, well, I'm speaking for, a whole lot of people that agree with me, and, it might be, 2 or 3 people, but you make it sound, or, there's a whole lot of people that are going to vote this way or vote that way, and, we call them mystery voters. I was in a meeting where there was this, it was fierce conflict, and we met with both sides, and the one side, the side that really felt like they were being offended, we weren't sure if anybody was gonna show up. It was on Zoom. We thought maybe 3 people might show up. And they had over 70 people on Zoom. It wasn't just people in the church, it was their neighbors and their friends and friends of family. Like, they got as many people as they could to show, like, we're really serious about this. Most people didn't really care, but they just got them to show up. Like, this is our support group here. It was maybe just 3 or 4 people that were really concerned about something. So there's this ability to kind of speak like, oh, this is representative of a whole bunch of people. And we really encourage people, like, just make clear I statements. Like, when this happened, this is kind of how this made me feel. Or this is how I see it. And really try to keep things in the I statement rather than speaking for a lot of people. Well, we can all agree that that kind of politicking going on. Like, no, it's just like this is my experience, and you really can't argue with people's experience, right? People's experiences are different. We can do a lot of different things to illustrate that, but all of us experience the world differently. And I think the prime example, we'll close with this before lunch, but we want to come back to this. We want to spend more time with this idea of bracketing and speaking for self after lunch. But I think the illustrations, y'all remember that photo that was floating around on the internet of the dress? The blue and white, I forget the colors. One was, some saw it as black and gold, some saw it as blue and white. And if you saw it as blue and white, you just could not understand how someone else might see it as black and gold. Like, it's obvious, it's blue and white. And so we all see, and on the tail end of that, just recently I read an article from a professor in one of the Cal universities who sees, I forget how many more colors than the normal. She has like 4, are they called odds in her eyes that pick up color receptors, and she has like an extra one. And so she sees way more colors than normal people do. And the way that she discovered it is that her daughter is colorblind, which is not typical. Usually it's just men that are colorblind, but women that have this particular genetic mutation, their daughters are often colorblind. So she can see like this horde, like millions of different colors. So she, as a little girl, she would say, "Oh, look at that, beautiful," and she would describe these colors, and people would say, "You're crazy. Like that's you're delusional." And so that's maybe kind of a simple example. Like we just see the world differently. We pick things up differently. Different things are important to us, and so we'll leave it at that. Jane, do you want to have a prayer or something before lunch, or how are you going to handle that? Okay. Okay, very good. And we'll be back at 1 o'clock.
So, first of all, the amazing food back there. We need to all say thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to our Arabic friends for sharing such an amazing spread. There's a little bit of everything. I just looked at it. So, some of you are leaving, like you're gonna have lunch and then you're leaving or something like that. We're collecting your name tags. So if you put them on the table right there, they will be used for the small group gatherings. And so if you just remember to leave your name tag, that'd be great. A couple observations about this room. What? Oh, now we have everybody. Hey, let's thank them again.
tables, and I invite you, since you've been with a particular table community, that maybe you want to mix up a little bit so you can talk with others during lunch. There's a Jenga game at every table, and instead of thinking competitively about Jenga, perhaps you want to think collaboratively about Jenga. How can you keep this standing as long as possible by working together? So that's a question. There are many tiles and other things to play with, so enjoy your time together. Let's pray. Holy God, we are so grateful to be together. We're grateful to gather around these tables and share our stories and laugh about our experiences and our characteristics as well as our foibles. It draws us closer together, dear God, and we are grateful. Thank you for the wonderful food and the fellowship we are about to share, and we pray that you bless us just as you have blessed all of us together in community. We ask this in Jesus' name, and we say, Amen. Any instructions? O team back there? You need to start. There we go. Listen to a fact. She's going to tell us what to do.
I guess I'm here until Maddie comes.
So let's sort of start on this side of the room and then kind of work around. Okay?